was born in Lowell and lived here except for a couple of stints in working in Washington for Paul Songus as a member of the House and later for Marty Meehan.
Okay.
When he was a member of the House as well, back in the days when it was actually functional.
When things got done.
Yeah.
Can you give us a time frame of when that was?
So
listeners?
Paul ran for the House against Paul Cronin and was elected in 1975. The two big issues then were how do you revitalize the urban centers in the congressional districts. Lowell at the time had one of the highest unemployment rates in the country, high teens normally. A number of the properties in the Central Business District were in tax title, if I recall correctly, 17 of them. And Paul's concept was to bring on staff who would work with the economic interests in the business community to help them with investment and identify opportunities for their growth in terms of employment. Paul Cronin, on the other hand, had an idea about, and he was an incumbent Republican. Paul had an idea about building an oil refinery in Drake, and needless to say, Paul was elected to the House. And then I joined his staff. Working on economic development issues. And prior to that, I worked for the City Development Authority, which was then the Urban Renewal Authority, doing both relocation work for them, and later I was hired as an assistant planner back in the days when Nixon's idea about community development block grants, providing funds to communities like Lowell to do community development came to be, and there was a lot of planning going on at that point about how the city utilized those funds. And Frank Keefe, another star really in terms of leadership and making a difference in Lowell, was the head of the planning department at that point.
So that means when you were doing that work, was that the 1960s, and was that when some of the urban renewal occurred in Lowell?
So some of the traditional urban renewal occurred in Lowell in the early 70s, and it involved, in the late 60s, it involved demolition of some of the city's historic assets.
Right.
I can remember, excuse me, sitting in homeroom at Lowell High School and looking across the canal in Lucy Larkin Park at the row houses that were being demolished, which back then I thought to myself, gee, that seems like quite a shame.
Right.
But, Lowell in those days wasn't really thinking about how do you look at your culture and your beginnings and your history and your architecture as a way of rebuilding confidence in the community and turning those, what people thought of as negatives, into positive assets.
Right.
Okay. So just to follow up again on the timeline, it was great hearing about you working with Paul Songus, and we all know he's an incredible driving force in the region. I think that might even be an understatement, but could you talk a little bit about, again, a little more depth on how did you come to work for first Congressman, then Senator Songus, and what was it like working for him, or any stories that come back to you about some key challenges? He was pretty strong-willed Congressman and Senator, so any particular memories of that?
Well, I can tell you about the interview. I was actually, Paul was interested in finding someone who knew about HUD programs, housing and urban development programs, and other grant programs that both the state and the federal government could offer communities as a way to revitalize themselves. So I had some experience in that. And fortunately for me, very fortunately for me, Frank Keefe and Kurt Shork, who was then the deputy director of the regional planning agency, a longtime friend of Frank's and a brilliant guy on his own, both of them were kind enough to recommend me to Paul for an interview. So I went for the interview, and at the time, of course, you have to know that this is the mid-70s, so I had a beard, and my hair was a little bit longer. I actually had hair in those days.
Did you have bell bottoms?
No, I'm not saying. So I met with Paul in his law office, and he's sitting back in his chair with his feet up on his desk, and I came in and I sat down, not knowing what to expect. And he said, so your last name is Joncas? And I said, yes, it is. And he said, well, it's not a Greek name, is it? And I said, no, it's not. It's French-Canadian, actually. And I said, but my heritage is also Portuguese because I grew up with my maternal grandparents and mom in the Portuguese neighborhood, and they were from Madeira. So he said, well, that's good because I wouldn't want to be accused of hiring one of my brethren. the Paul sense of ethics right in, nepotism, no nepotism, even if I never met you before.
Right.
And then the last question he asked me was, are you willing to shave? I said, absolutely.
Okay.
So
you got the job.
I got the job, fortunately. And it was a great experience working for him. In thinking about Paul and leadership, he was an incredible example and mentor in so many ways. He had a certain vision too, and very significant political skills. I recall one day having a conversation with him about who was about to become city manager, and that was D. Joseph Tully. And I said to him, Paul, what are we going to do? He said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, it looks like, Joe Tully may be city manager, and, he's much more conservative than you, comes from Drake. And he said, well, Steve, he has the votes. So I'm going to meet with them and tell them that I want to work with them.
Right.
And the two of them may have been political oddfellows, but they were, in a way, a unique partnership was formed between the two of them. And Joe's capability, he really excelled at not only influencing the newspaper, but in getting 8-1 votes, with Dick Howe being the usual vote against whatever he wanted to do, which led to Dick's political success as well. So they actually met at the Spear House, which is no longer a restaurant on the boulevard, and on the back of a napkin came up with the concept for the Lowell plan.
Wow.
And before that, when Paul was a member of the House, George Duncan spoke to him about whether or not there was a way to get the banks together to create a fund that could be used to provide financing, cheaper financing and subordinated financing to downtown businesses to get them to adopt the sort of historic preservation, revitalization, aesthetics in rehabbing their building. So that was another example of his leadership and his political acumen, right? Because instead of just gathering them all together, he decided that it made sense to involve the state delegation and have something called the Lowell Development Financial Corporation created. It was legislation, a home rule petition that went through the House and the Senate, and Phil Shea was, one of the champions of it. Phil Shea and Paul Saunders once upon a time competed with each other for mayor. I think it was 100 ballots.
Yeah.
And then they ended up electing Ellen Sampson.
Right.
Sort of like electing a Speaker of the House these days,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? From the LDFC, the next step in that was getting all the banks together, bank heads in one room. And he was able to do that. There were 17 banks headquartered in Lowell at that point.
So that must have been a pretty easy walk, 17 banks working together, collaborating.
Well,
how did you overcome the skepticism? How did Paul, help to overcome the skepticism that you could turn this gateway city around?
So Well, the other interesting fact about that meeting is that some of them actually didn't know each other, so you can accuse them of collusion and redlining, at least in a colluded sort of way. I think they bought into the concept that something really needed to be done. Because, you think about 17 properties being a tax title, meaning that the city can take them over for non-payment of taxes in a district as small as Lowell's downtown. That's pretty substantial. And I think at that point, people were trying to buy into, as well as the city, were buying into this concept of, well, maybe historic preservation and revitalization is the way to go. We went to the city council as well to get them to approve of the home rule petition. And the preamble had the normal language about improving housing, fostering economic development, addressing transportation needs, which was interpreted by one city councilor as an attempt to continue the construction of the Lowell connector through the central business district.
Right.
So yours truly was there trying to explain that that wasn't the case. That it was a preamble meant to talk about overall goals, but this organization was only going to be involved in providing less expensive debt and subordinated debt. You take a second position to the first mortgage, encourage people to invest in their property. And he said, we need to get someone here who knows what they're talking about. So leadership, if leadership results in challenging the status quo, you're going to get pushback.
Right.
The same thing happened later with the Lowell plan and Paul's efforts around the Lowell model for educational excellence, bringing in educators and trying to make the school system more open to being engaging the business community and parents in major decisions like selecting principals and superintendents and looking at educational policy. Well, the feedback from the school committee was, how dare you? I mean, our schools are excellent, but the fact is that they weren't. And but there was that resistance to change that was looked at as an insult as opposed to an opportunity.
Right.
Let's look at this in a way that we can really take advantage of it. And what harm will it do? Right? We'll come out with better results. And if we come out with better results, it'll be worth being told that our school systems are not excellent.
So how do you think that mindset was changed then? Because, as you say, you're going to get that pushback until you can do maybe some of the first projects. So how would you describe the change where people started to welcome and see that there was a future in some of these new developments?
I would say results. One result was the passage of the legislation creating a study organization to look at the feasibility of establishing Lowell as a national park based on it being the birthplace of the American Industrial Revolution. It was also a success because in those days, the federal government actually cared about center cities and in a way that resulted in programs like the Urban Development Action Grant. And the Lowell plan, again, showed some leadership in bringing on American Cities Corporation, which was a subsidiary of Rouse, who developed Faneuil Hall. And they came up with a master plan on easing the access from the Gorham Street down to the Central Business District, leading to the idea of the hotel and the Wang Training Center, which is now Middlesex Community College, reusing the mills, not knocking them down, but reusing them for housing and commercial purposes. So there was buy-in into that too, and the state government also pitched in because of Frank's participation as in the Dukakis administration, Frank Keith's participation in the Dukakis administration in establishing heritage state parks, which got involved in the ownership of the city's 6.7 miles of canals and looking at that as an asset. So people were seeing progress,
Right.
I think, which made it easier for them to buy in. Couldn't get Nathan Burke to do it though.
Good Burke's department store.
Yes.
You talked about some of the great politicians of the region. You and I, obviously, in addition to that early work, you became a major player in the development of the nonprofit network that we all depend on in the city of Lowell. So much great work. You headed up at one point, you were president when I was on the board for the Greater Lowell Community Foundation. So can you tell us about that experience? Obviously, Dick Donahue, the founder of the Community Foundation, I think it's safe to say that. Tell us about some of those, your involvement in those nonprofits, and if you want to say any words about Dick and Nancy Donahue and their time and their importance to the city.
Well, Lowell would be a far different place if not for the commitment demonstrated by Dick and Nancy. They supported every institution, nonprofit, large and small, including the university.
Absolutely.
In their not only service, but through their philanthropic efforts. MRT, the Merrimack Repertory Theater, was. I'd come back from Washington because the campaign for the Senate started, and we had an office above George's Textile. And Nancy showed up one day with Barbara Abrahamian, and she said, "Steve, we have a fabulous idea." And I said, "Okay, what is it?" I'm all ears. And you can make a joke about that too, but because it's self-serving. Anyway, and they said, well, what we want to do is start a theater in Lowell, a professional regional theater. And, we want to start a professional regional theater. And I said, well, where are you going to do that? And she said, in Lowell. And I sort of looked askance, because this was 1979.
Right.
And
this is pre-park.
Pre-park.
Yep.
Well, the park had been in legislation had passed, but it was pre-park in a way.
Yeah.
And so kudos to Nancy because for decades now she's really been a driving force in the MRT and its ongoing growth and meaningfulness to the community, not just in Lowell, but in Greater Lowell and elsewhere. A champion of the arts, obviously. But she supported everything else from Lowell Community Health Center to so many organizations, the Whistler House,
Girls.
Girls.
Yeah.
I mean, the list is, as long as you want.
Absolutely.
Extraordinary people, both of them. And Dick, of course, was really kind of no nonsense when it came to decision making, and was very direct in his style, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
Well, was Dick ever the same one with Paul in terms of two strong, direct people?
Yes, but they were partners as well,
right.
and along with Nancy, they both appreciated what each other was trying to do for the community.
And then we got diverted, but also your role with the Community Foundation.
Yes. So I remember being drafted to serve on the board. This shows you how direct it can be. At that point, I was married to their daughter Nancy, and my mom had passed away. And we had the memorial service for her, and I was sitting in the limousine. We were ready to go to the reception. And Dick and Nancy came over, and I sort of got out of the car, just thanked them for coming. And he said, I have a favor to ask you to do.
No, not there.
I have a favor to ask you. And I said, sure, what is it? He said, I want you to come on the Community Foundation board. I thought to myself, boy,
At a funeral service.
I did, So I said,
Yeah.
well, if you're the one asking, then the answer is yes.
Yeah.
I don't know why you're asking me,
Right.
especially at this
Right
moment.
now.
But the answer is yes.
But it was important to him right then.
Yeah, it was important to him, so, to be honest, it was important to me too, because I had a great deal of respect for Jack.
So he knew how much you had to bring to the table because
You're too
your
kind.
strength your strength in economic development at that point had become kind of legendary. And I think we do want to talk about that in a minute because, part of the thrust of this project is to help the next generation to understand that you can do well and do good. We want to talk about your transition back into the private sector, but again, the Community Foundation, as president, you oversaw a time of incredible growth. I remember some of the goals that Dick Donahue had thrown down. And I remember when you were elected as president, kind of looking at the board and saying, okay, so we're going to get to 20 million. I think that was his number. What is your memory of that time?
Yeah. Well, at that point, the major fund that we had was the scholarship program for Lowell High School. Bill Samaras and Peter Stanis had been able to raise $4 million in scholarship funds. So we had a long way to go. And the Parker Foundation also gave us $1 million too. I think that was the first gift that we received. And we were going through some transition then from a leadership standpoint. The person who had been a long-time executive director had moved on to another opportunity. So we had some bumps in the road too, from the standpoint of getting our ship right as far as staff leadership goes. But really, what really struck me about the Community Foundation is Dick was so right that instead of our money, Lowell's money, going to the Boston Foundation, he always complained about that. It should be kept local so that, because locally the people who are engaged know what the needs are better and would be more responsive than an organization that's 30 miles away and headquartered in the city of Boston. So what really struck me about it is the teamwork amongst the board members and how each of them was totally committed to doing everything that they could in order to make the foundation impactful.
Like,
And that included asking people for money, which is not an easy task. It doesn't come easily to some people.
Yeah.
But the foundation grew and it had prudent investment policies, and fortunately the economy continued to grow, which meant the stock market did well. So I think we're at 50 million or so today.
It's amazing.
Wow.
Yeah, the thing that really is indicative of the Community Foundation's the respect that it's earned, I think, is that during COVID, the governor's wife had established a fund which many corporations and individuals had contributed to. And they were trying to figure out a way to distribute it. How do we get it out in there so it makes the biggest difference that it possibly can in terms of addressing this very serious challenge? And they chose community foundations as the vehicle for distributing that money.
Wow.
And Jay Linehan, who I have tremendous respect for, handled that in such a masterful way that they ended up getting a second tranche because of the capability that they demonstrated.
Okay.
And Jay tells a story about how nonprofits needed supplies, everything from hand washing to paper goods to whatever it was that they needed. Sounds trivial today, but sometimes the supermarkets were,
Right.
shelves were empty.
They weren't. You already forget.
So he would tell a story. I know that he personally would put stuff in his trunk and drive around the city and deliver it. And it takes me back to Paul Songus, in his interest in the park at the corner of Nesmith and Andover Street.
Right.
And his being out there cutting the lawn when he was a member of the Senate, and afterwards cutting the lawn and trimming the bushes and convincing people to do the same thing with him. And that's why that kind of leadership is successful, because you're not just saying to someone, why don't you go and do this?
Right.
Come do this with me.
Right.
There's a big difference
Right.
in those two approaches, the latter being the more successful.
For sure.
I think we'll all still remember Nancy on the Bucket Brigade for the Folk Festival, kind of iconic happening every year. But
So there's a story about Nancy and her efforts on cleaning the canals.
yes,
Here's a woman in her 80s, and she's in the canals when they're dry, picking out trash with a group of volunteers, and along comes a fellow, and he's looking down, and he says to her, "Hey, Mama, what you doing down there?" And she looks up at him and she says, "Well, we're cleaning the canals. This is a volunteer group, and we're trying to beautify the city." And he said, "Oh, gee, Mama, that's a great idea. I'm going to come help you out." So he climbs down, and he has a can of Coke with him. And he says, "It's really nice to meet you. Would you like a drink?"
and then when Nancy, she probably did share that.
She did not. She had certain boundaries.
But along those, showing the way and being part of the solution. So you did make the transition into private real estate development, and you've become, again, kind of iconic in your ability to pull together public-private partnerships that clearly benefit the community. You have worked with all the major nonprofits, Lowell Community Health Center and their expansion, community teamwork and their expansion, and all of the great housing work that they're doing. So could you talk about that transition, and why did you decide to stay in Lowell? You could have gone into Boston and probably made a bigger fortune, but you chose to stay in this community and give back. Tell us about that.
A smaller fortune would have been good too. Larry Anson is another example of leadership. Larry and Dick Donahue co-chaired the Lowell Plan. And Larry was the president and owner of Joanne Fabrics, which had manufactured upholstery for the automobile and furniture industry. And they had facilities in Lowell and in South Carolina, I think. They employed something like 1,500 people. Well, Larry also had a tendency to want to enjoy life. So he made the decision that he wanted to sell the company, and that's when Elton McCallum became the owner of Joanne Fabrics. So Larry approached me and he said, "Look, would you be interested in working with me? I want to be involved in real estate." And of course, Larry was the money partner, and I was the worker bee. So that's how I got into real estate development on the private side. And that lasted from about 83 through 91 or so, when unfortunately Larry became ill and passed away. And Paul was also a partner when he left the Senate. So we did everything from putting together a partnership with Skangas family and Westland Creamery to do a 125 megawatt cogeneration plant. We had 80 acres that we purchased with a purchase money mortgage from sellers in Leominster, of all places, at the junction of 190 and Route 2. We tried to do a major development in Methuen as well. We had an industrial park with some success in Acton. where we were able to attract companies like Katana Spaniel, which is in the olive oil business, and who was the apple juice producer up there? Trying to remember the name, but I can't.
Cider.
Anyway, they were also there. We built a 100,000 square foot warehouse on spec and got that filled up.
And those businesses are important to the region.
Yeah.
Again, it's like what Senator Songas are. It's being able to have a real economic future. People need jobs. Seeing those two dovetail together, pretty important. What are some of your favorite projects that you're working on today?
There's one that you know because you've driven by it, I'm sure, but the John Doe Credit Union and Will Susi partnered up on mixed-use development in the heart of the Merrimack Street, Market Street, Salem Street, Moody Street corridor to build a 30,000 square foot office building, a parking facility for 160 cars, and 32 condominium units with 5,000 square feet of retail space to be sold to first-time home buyers at 100% of area median income or below. So that required, assembling various parcels, and its financing. Of course, on the credit union side wasn't difficult, but given construction costs and interest rates these days, there was definitely a need for significant subsidy in order to make the units affordable for people at 100% of AMI or below. So, that meant going to mass housing and applying for funding under the Commonwealth Builder Program, which provided $8 million in subsidy on what is an $18 million project. And we also had to work with the city to get Community Preservation Act money because all the state agencies, when they're looking at local projects, want evidence of their support. And it doesn't mean a support letter. It means, let's see some financial commitment as well. Everybody should have some support.
I just want to make sure we also mention, if we have just another minute or two, the Lesher Park and Songus Arena. If you could say something about those two projects going in and any, first of all, the intent of putting them in and then any difference they made.
Well, in the arena case, initially Paul went to Gil Campbell and Elkin McCallum and, who was the third person?
I get it, George Baracus.
George Baracus, yes. Of course. I'm sorry, George. I hope you're not watching this.
He's doing an event tonight, so I will.
So he convinced those three to sponsor a hockey team that was an affiliate of National Hockey League, on the Long Island team, I think. So that, along with the university, of course, was an impetus for making that happen. He thought that having a facility like that would, and in having a ballpark with a minor league team, would make Lowell a destination and also make Lowell a center for activities that would appeal to families.
That's great.
Events happen that are beyond anyone's control, so things have changed, of course, but, there's still assets there that have potential for contributing to the quality of life in our community.
Oh, I moved here in 2002 and people told me right away about the spinners. You have to go.
So we know you have to, you have some pressing business. We really appreciate you taking the time today. But if you were speaking to the next generation, we'll wrap up here. Any last words of advice, or what would you say to them? Is it important to do good, to give back, make a difference?
So the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Tutu wrote a book about joy, the source of joy, and if you read that, you'll see that they both say that their greatest source of joy is doing things for others. And personally, that's been my own experience. For example, serving on the community foundation was a real source of joy for me, despite the ups and downs. Even in your work, you can choose a way of life that really makes a difference to a community and to the people in it. So affordable housing development does that for me. Just regular private development, if it creates job opportunities and stimulates a local economy, that in a way is giving back through your professional endeavors. The other thing I would say is that the world is changing. In some cases, not for the better. But the impact of technology is going to have a considerable effect on everyone's future. When you start thinking about AI and robotics and advancing communications and how to fight climate change and overcome the tension and fear and anger that comes from caste systems that still exist in the United States. Addressing these issues is really going to take work. We can't be complacent. What's going on today is so challenging in terms of threats to in my view, threats to our democracy and our way of life, that we need to pay attention. And we need to pursue our beliefs. And there can be differences in ideas and approaches to problem solving, but there can't be this.
Well, you were certainly a big part of the solutions in this community when
You're too kind.
Similarly needed that kind of lift. So we really thank you.
We do. Yeah, very well said. Thank you so much.
You're both very kind, and thank you for having me. And I hope it in some ways valuable to your efforts.
You're welcome.
So thanks so much.
It will be absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.